Hello everybody and welcome to the Filipino Freethinkers podcast that's also a video. I'm Red and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Phelim Kine. And can you tell us a bit about what you do here at the Human Rights Watch?
Thank you very much for having me here, Red. It's a real pleasure. So I am the Deputy Director of Asia Division at Human Rights Watch. So I supervise our work, our research and advocacy on the Philippines, Afghanistan, and Indonesia.
Yeah, so you have done a lot of work on the issue of extrajudicial killings, on Duterte. Can you tell us a bit about your story? How first you or Human Rights Watch got wind of Duterte, and how it's been in the decades, I guess, that you've been covering.
Sure. I think it's important to note that extrajudicial killings have been a problem in the Philippines for a very long time, under multiple presidents. And I think it's important to note that, going back to former President Arroyo, Human Rights Watch noted and protested the fact that large numbers of individuals who were associated with the left and the New People's Army were targeted for assassination by armed forces of the Philippines or associated individuals. And that problem with extrajudicial killings continued on into the Aquino administration. But what we're seeing under President Duterte is this extremely alarming uptick in terms of numbers. So with the volume of killings is absolutely appalling. In just 8 months or so, we've had more than 7,000, 8,000 Filipinos killed, shot down by both, quote unquote, by both Philippine National Police and also by, quote unquote, unidentified gunmen. And that's the government's narrative, but our research indicates that there's something much more sinister going on.
Yeah, and what is going on? Like, first of all, like you've done investigation in Davao as well. So does the Davao Death Squad exist? And now that Duterte is president, like, where is the Davao Death Squad now?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So in 2009, we published a report all about the Davao Death Squad. And we documented in a forensic detail, yes, the Davao Death Squad exists. And this was an organization that was funded, organized, and directed by elements of the local Davao government and by elements of the local police. Now, there is no evidence directly linking former mayor of Davao, Duterte, current President Duterte, to the Davao Death Squad. However, it is obvious from his statements during that time and since that he was an enthusiastic supporter of extrajudicial violence as a quote-unquote crime control technique. And we have seen, and that was the basis of his campaign platform, and he has delivered on that platform with a vengeance as president. That's why we have so many dead Filipinos with absolutely no accountability.
So he's run on the platform of what happened in Davao, like some call it, I think by mistake, that the safest city in the world. Like, I will bring to the Philippines, but I've often told people, like, why are you so proud of Davao? What do you think? Like, do you think Davao was a success? Like that experiment that happened, the way they solved the problems there, do you think it was a successful state?
So I think we need to take a look at the facts. So Human Rights Watch, we are a fact-based organization and a verified fact-based organization. Everything we say is backed by what we know to be true. And what we know about the Philippines, and particularly about Davao City, is that these claims that the Duterte anti-crime initiative, that of course was backed by the Davao Death Squad, did not really affect crime rates in any measurable way. The statistics that the government of Davao has trotted out to say what a safe place it is, we have analyzed those statistics, and they indicate that they have basically corrupted or cooked the books in terms of those statistics and not included certain categories of crimes. Here's the most important thing about crime statistics in Davao. They don't take into account that hundreds, if not thousands of people were shot dead by the Davao Death Squad. That is a huge criminal problem that is completely glossed over when people talk about how Davao is a safe place. Any place in the world, whether it's New York City, whether it is in Norway, or whether it's in Britain, if citizens are at risk of being shot dead by gunmen who are backed by the local government and police, that by definition is a very unsafe city.
So apart from the safety of Davao and the success of that place, a lot of people think that Duterte is this revolutionary genius who has a new and effective way of dealing with problems. But as your work, spans the rest of the world, do you think what Duterte is doing is anything new or unique?
I can say that what we look at in terms of a human rights organization, and we are looking at our concerns about violations of universal human rights. And universal human rights, of course, are standards that are developed by the United Nations. So they're not US standards or Canadian standards. They are universal international standards. And some of the most important standards and rights are the right to life. And the right to life in the Philippines is under complete attack by a government-backed campaign which is targeting so-called drug suspects. And so that is something that we have seen in other parts of the world, most recently in Thailand under former Prime Minister Thaksin, who launched a similar war on drugs that resulted in large numbers of extrajudicial killings. What we have documented as an organization across 90 countries is that there are multiple examples of national leaders who use the rhetoric of stability, security, anti-crime to commit egregious abuses against their citizens with no accountability. So in that sense, what President Duterte is doing isn't new. It doesn't make it any less wrong, and it definitely means that there needs to be accountability.
So a lot of people are hoping that once this drug war is over, the Philippines will finally have that discipline that will make us into that Singapore that that a lot of people want to happen. Do you think that it will result in that?
My concern is that this drug war is becoming the forever war. And by that I mean the president himself has said he intends to continue this abusive campaign by the police until the end of his campaign, end of his term in 2022. So that means if he delivers on that, that means thousands more deaths. That's the first thing. Yeah. The second thing is that we at Human Rights Watch have documented how these quote-unquote unidentified gunmen are in fact working hand in glove with Philippine National Police units. And that our concern is, as we have seen in Davao, as we have also documented in Tagum City in Mindanao, once you let death squads off the leash, once they are free to roam and kill with impunity, they keep killing. And what they do is that they develop a business model and they become kill for profit enterprises. That's particularly what we've seen in Tagum City. So our message is it's going to be, for Filipinos who are thinking that there's going to be a nice clean end to this war, which really, if you look at the victims, is more of a war on the poor than a war on drugs, it's not going to happen. That what's happening is you are going to be seeing the legacy of this impunity continue for years. And successive governments that come after Duterte are going to grapple with this problem, and it is going to cause massive losses of life and violations looking into the future.
So, despite all this, Duterte still has that popular support. Like the war on drugs has popular support.
Yeah,
and people like you are commentating from places like New York or wherever. They're seen as outsiders who don't really understand the context of the Philippines. So what can you say to people who make this criticism?
That's another great question. And three answers to that. The first one is, I have no idea of the methodology or reliability of these popularity polls. I see them 70%, 80%. I don't know what the methodology is. The second thing is, what those polls don't take into account is that any type of meaningful opposition to this abusive war on drugs has been harassed, intimidated, and stifled and silenced by both the government and by what we refer to as the Duterte keyboard army, who seek out and seek to intimidate, harass, and silence anyone on social media or in a public forum who challenges this narrative of the drug war. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, there is a difference between popularity and legitimacy, okay? A legitimate government is legitimate because it obeys and respects the foundations, the legal foundations of the country, which is the Constitution, which is the rule of law. In the United States, polls show that the majority of Americans support torture, Does that mean that the United States should torture? No, it's illegal under international law and domestic law. So you don't govern by quote-unquote popularity. You govern by what is right. And what's right is what is enshrined in universal human rights standards, in international law, and your own constitution. So for people to say that it's okay for an abusive drug war that kills thousands of some of the poorest, most marginalized, most vulnerable citizens, that's okay because it's popular. These people don't understand anything about what real legitimacy is.
Yeah, so human rights, sure you, one other criticism is that you give these human rights to drug pushers, to drug addicts, to alleged criminals. But what about the human rights of the victims?
Right.
Like what are you doing about that? How do you solve that problem? What is your response to this about the not caring about the victims of and would-be victims?
Yeah. Again, it's a wrong-headed criticism for a couple reasons. The first is rights are for everyone. Every individual, by the fact that you're human, you have human rights, okay? And one of those basic human rights is a right to due legal process. So that means whether you or me or anyone is implicated or suspected in criminal activity, that you have the right to a lawyer, that you have a right to a trial, that you have a right to challenge evidence. These are given to all of us. And there's a reason for that. Because if you don't have those protections, what you have instead is mob justice, death squad justice. You have untold thousands of people who are targeted because someone said that they were quote-unquote drug personalities. That's what's going on in the Philippines right now. You know, those 7,000, 8,000 dead Filipinos, they never saw a courtroom. They never got to see a lawyer. They never got to examine evidence. Someone decided they should die, and they died. And that's absolutely wrong.
So when all of this is over, when, hopefully Duterte is no longer our leader, there will be some accountability, right? And I've already read about how the police, what are they facing? These people who participated in the drug war under the orders of Duterte.
Right.
And apart from the police, what do you think is the responsibility or accountability of these people who supported him, who at first who voted for him, but the people who still condone him and support him despite what's happening? So where's the accountability there?
So, one of the key messages of our research is, our message is to President Duterte, to Solicitor General Calida, to Secretary of Justice Aguirre, to Director General of the Philippines National Police De La Rosa. You are implicated in very serious crimes. We are talking about crimes against humanity. And this is something that you need to be concerned about, because there is the very real possibility that you will face justice either inside the Philippines or outside the Philippines. And if you want to avoid that, it means you need to do a 180-degree policy change in terms of this quote-unquote war on drugs. There needs to be an impartial, meaningful investigation. There needs to be accountability. And so that's the message. And our message to members of the Philippines National Police is, you need to be concerned about your complicity in these crimes, because these are very serious crimes. Either your passive complicity, that you know they're happening and you say nothing, or active complicity. If you are actively involved in these killings, you are potentially complicit, and you can be potentially brought to justice for these crimes against humanity. So this is a very important message. And again, and like your question says, there needs to be accountability, and the lesson of history is accountability eventually comes. Sooner or later, and we hope it comes sooner in the Philippines, because otherwise there will be so many more needless, brutal deaths.
And what do you think about the people who just support him, from the sidelines, the citizens who are complicit, I think, in what's happening?
For citizens who are aware of the unlawful, abusive reality of this war on drugs, and who have voted for it and continue to advocate for it, these people need to seriously examine their consciences. These are people who need to examine what they feel is really important in their lives. And they need to examine how they can accept that untold thousands of Filipinos who are fathers, mothers, children even who have died, how they can be all right with the fact that they have been shot down or stabbed or mutilated as part of this war on drugs, and they can accept that as an acceptable part of modern Filipino society.
So you already mentioned the potential consequences, when the reckoning happens, international criminal court and stuff like that. But consequences are already happening in the international level. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we know that that there is a increasing lack of tolerance for this murderous war on drugs, and so we've seen, for example, how the United States government has suspended the sale of assault rifles to the Philippines National Police because they have concerns that those weapons might be used in abuses related to the war on drugs. We have also seen how the United Nations, from the head of the United Nations and also United Nations special rapporteurs on extrajudicial killings and torture, have weighed in and expressed grave concern and opposition to the war on drugs and also to the moves toward reinstating the death penalty. And even more recently, and actually much more pertinently to a government that professes to be concerned about economic development and prosperity for its people, last week the European Union Trade Commissioner Malmström came out and said that these abusive policies, specifically the war on drugs and the move toward reinstating the death penalty, might result in the suspension of Philippine tariff-free exports to the EU, which could cost billions to the Philippines in euros. So this is a really good example of how human rights abusing policies can have a financial cost for abusive governments. But of course, the fact is that it's ordinary Filipinos who will pay the price for those suspensions. And that's why it's important that Filipinos speak out, step up, and intensify their opposition to this campaign. Human Rights Watch is not going to change the Philippines. The United Nations isn't going to change the Philippines. Your history, the history of the Philippine people, is of courageous individuals coming together to oppose abusive governments and to bring about positive change. That was the wondrous aspect of people's power that overthrew the Marcos dictatorship. That same spirit is needed now, even more so, in addressing these abuses.
Phelim, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Ed.